Hello and a very good morning. You're watching the Breakfast News on Rajya Sabha television. I'm your host Frank Pereira. Let's begin as always with the latest headlines. 16-hour hostage standoff ends in Sydney. Lone gunman and two others killed, both Indian hostages safe. Australian Prime Minister Tony Abbott says his country is vulnerable after the incident. Indian cricket team in Brisbane seeks more security. Government reaches deal with state governments on GST petrol to be kept in exchange for inclusion of entry tax. And in the coal scam case hearing, Delhi courts likely to pass order on the CBI's closure report today. Our top focus on the bulletin this morning. The armed siege at a cafe in the heart of Sydney ended after police entered the building last night. 3 people were killed, the gunman and 2 of the hostages, 4 others were wounded. The gunman was identified as Manharun Monis, who once was prosecuted for sending offensive letters to families of Australian troops killed in Afghanistan. Here's more.
After a 16-hour confrontation, 3 people died, including the Islamist State gunman who held dozens of people hostage in a cafe in central Sydney. The gunman was identified as an Iranian refugee.
What we do know is that the perpetrator was well known to state and Commonwealth authorities. He had a long history of violent crime, infatuation with extremism and mental instability.
Our first thoughts and prayers this morning are with the innocent victims of this horrendous, vicious attack. I want to say to their family and friends that everyone in New South Wales stands beside you. They stand beside you today. They stand beside you tomorrow. They will stand beside you forever.
Back home in India, family members of the 2 Indian hostages were relieved to hear their safe exit. Infosys employee Vishwakant Anki Reddy was safely evacuated after being held at gunpoint.
From the beginning itself, I have a confidence that my son will come out of this problem. This is temporarily, nothing to worry.
We are quite gratified by the efforts made by the Australian authorities in ensuring that this is brought to an end at the end of the day.
The deadly siege invited condemnation from world leaders.
It's a reminder, albeit on the other side of the world, but a country that's very close to all our hearts, of the threat we face from Islamist extremist terror. Obviously, we'll always look at all these cases, see if there are lessons that we can learn.
Flags will fly half-mast across New South Wales to honour the victims. In a dramatic end to the violent siege, the police entered the cafe building shortly after a series of loud bangs were heard and groups of hostages ran out onto the street. The gunman, Manharun Monis, forced some hostages to hold up a black Islamic banner at the window of the cafe. Monis received political asylum in Australia in 1996 and was on a bail facing a number of charges. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV.
Well, joining me for a chat this morning on this very subject is Alok Bansal, Executive Director, SASA. Good morning and thank you for joining me on the program, Alok Bansal. Let's talk about the siege, in Australia. What went wrong there? There have been several reports that called it a lone wolf attack, and now the Australian government has come out and clarified, stating that it's not a lone wolf attack, but it is indeed an attack that was carried out by someone who's had his trials with the law in the past and someone who's mentally unstable.
Well, whatever the Australian government has said does not preclude a lone wolf attack, because the Australian government has also said that he has been in the past known to have written to the families of Australian servicemen who died fighting in Afghanistan. So he had an infatuation as far as radical Islam was concerned, and was venturing to this sort of an ideology. And I think it is the permeation of this ideology from across the seas which has actually further aggravated it, because still the complete details are not out as to what was his demand. He wanted to speak to the Australian Prime Minister. What did he wish to speak? How was his behavior with the hostages? What did he talk to the hostages? The real motives of this individual are not known, but definitely he was driven by radical Islamic ideology, as he forced his hostages to hold those flags. So to some extent, whether we like it or not, this attack was driven by the waves of radicalism that are sweeping through the globe today, which have emanated from the Middle East and in our vicinity, and are spreading very fast across every nook and corner of the globe.
You know, Islamic State in the recent past has called for several such lone wolf attacks across Australia and also the Western world. Can we expect more such attacks in time to come?
There is no doubt, because please understand, in recent times, Islamic State's attraction for the Muslim youths seem to have increased, because on the cyber media, Islamic State has done a good job of indoctrinating many of them. And this actually brings us to the gravity of this ideology, which is of radicalization. And to counter it, I think a time has come when all the countries of the globe must come together and evolve a concerted strategy of de-radicalization. It should not be viewed as a simple law and order problem. It's a battle for the minds. And this battle for the minds can only be won by using a concerted strategy of de-radicalization, and the important tools of this particular strategy would be media and the educational curriculum of the children.
You know, there have been several intelligence reports over the last few months, especially in the UK, France and Australia, talking about several such attacks being carried out by Islamist radicals. So do you believe, you know, going forward now, the next few months, the Western world, especially, you know, UK, America and Australia, are going to intensify some of their raids that they carried out a few months ago against so-called Islamist radicals?
I think the global community has realized that this menace of Islamic State is far too serious to be left for any single country to handle. And I think if you realize the last United Nations General Assembly session, I think most of the countries of the world realized, and I think there is a broad consensus emerging as far as coming together to deal with this particular menace is concerned. And I think in days to come, the Western world would be more willing to target this menace of Islamic State, because it will be far better for the global community to eliminate the Islamic State and its leadership in Iraq and Syria, rather than allow them to proliferate, grow in strength and affect them in every nook and corner of the globe.
You know, do you think that stricter online monitoring is something that is extremely essential at this point in time? Because most of the recruitment as far as Islamic State is concerned is being done on, you know, the social networking sites, and social networking medium seems to be their main, you know, focus area.
Well, monitoring is definitely required, because then you can counter them, because I'm not really in favor of censorship, because any censorship of internet or cyber media actually leads youth more towards this particular direction. But what is more important is that the society as a whole needs to tackle with this problem far more seriously. The parents need to look at their children, because as was shown in the case of youth from Kalyan who went to Iraq, the parents were totally oblivious to this sort of trait that was emerging in their children. And by and large in most Indian homes, middle class homes, you have religious teachers coming and inculcating either religious education or some language education to their wards. And many of these parents never bother to check the antecedents of these religious teachers or what exactly are they teaching for that 1.5 hour, which when these innocent minds are with these teachers, they are left to themselves. And I think this has been a very, very major source of radicalization, and I think the parents as such need to pay a greater attention to these children who are being taught either the languages or the theology by this so-called half-baked religious scholars.
You know, talking about the incident in Sydney itself in the cafe, do you think it should have been handled in a better way, or do you think that was the right way to go about it?
See, as of now, the people who died, other than the gunman, there is a little confusion.
Yeah.
The initial report said that they died of heart attack. And if that is the case, I think this was a fairly successful operation because no collateral damage significant collateral damage was there, and I think the gunman was taken out. And I think some of the things that the Australian government and the police did are really exemplary. The manner in which they cordoned off the area, the manner in which no unnecessary news was allowed to go into the media. The gunman wanted to talk to the Australian Prime Minister, wanted to get to the media, and his access to these publicity-seeking tools was extremely restricted. He was actually forced to ask one of the hostage to ring up to the radio station to seek some sort of a publicity. And I think the police kept him under communication. They kept communicating with him, but did not let him achieve his objectives. They neither said that we are not going to put you through to the Prime Minister, but they did not put him through to the Prime Minister. So they kept delaying him. And in a lone wolf attack like this, there is a limit to the physical stress that an individual can bear. And I think at some stage the tiring of the physical faculties was bound to occur. And I think the police was waiting for that particular opportune moment. And I think it was well past midnight in Australia when they actually struck. Once the details come, we could probably do a better post-mortem as far as whether. But undoubtedly, whatever little we saw, it was exemplary. The media did not report any of the moves of the police. It was only ex post facto reporting, and the way they cordoned off, the way they evacuated the people, and there was no unnecessary crowding, no unnecessarily spectators actually crowding around and hindering the operations.
The operation itself. All right. Thank you so much, Alok Bansal, for joining us there with all those details and putting things into perspective for us as far as the Sydney attack is concerned. Well, meanwhile, the security of the Indian cricket team currently touring Australia has been tightened. The cricketers are preparing for the second test match starting in Brisbane on Wednesday. External Affairs Ministry spokesperson Syed Akbaruddin said that the Australian authorities conveyed that additional police forces had been deployed with the Indian team after the hostage incident. India are currently playing a 4-match test series in Australia. Moving on to some national news now. In a last-minute compromise deal, the centre decided to keep petroleum out of GST. This will in return, of course, for state governments agreeing to entry tax being subsumed in the new tax regime proposed from April 2016. The Finance Ministry will also seek legal opinion on how it can be accommodated in the Constitution Amendment Bill that it wants to bring in the ongoing winter session of Parliament. A compromise was reportedly reached on the issue after an hour-long meeting between Finance Minister Arun Jaitley and Finance Ministers of 7 states, including Punjab, Haryana, Gujarat, Tamil Nadu, Maharashtra, Karnataka and Jammu and Kashmir. Moving on now, declining prices of vegetables and fuel has pulled down the inflation to zero level in November. This is the lowest figure in about 5.5 years. The wholesale price index-based inflation was at 1.77% in October and 7.52% in November 2013. The figures exert pressure on RBI to cut rates to boost growth. The Reserve Bank has maintained a status quo in interest rates since January. The RBI factors in retail inflation while formulating its monetary policy. In its policy earlier this month, RBI Governor Raghuram Rajan had hinted at a rate cut early next year if inflation continued to decline and government took steps to contain fiscal deficit.
The inputs that go into inflation right now are very benign and in fact are moderating significantly, whether you look at commodities such as oil and iron ore, whether you look at global economic activity or alternatively you look at slack capacity across the system. For all of these reasons, we are in the grip of deflationary forces globally, and certainly that is going to have a significant impact in India as well.
Well, it's time for a short break now, but still to come on the show. Today is the 16th of December. It's Vijay Divas. We'll show you how the armed forces are preparing for the big day. Stay tuned.